Welcome once again to Cycle Sports Radio. I'm your host, Patrick Harris. I'm also the executive producer of Cycle Sports TV, and you can find us on the internet at cyclesportstv.com. You can find all of our 100 and some odd videos at youtube.com/cyclesportstv. And for any of you social media junkies, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Cycle Sports TV. We're on Pinterest, we're on Instagram, we're on all these different multimedia, social media outlets. We're all over the place. We have lots of great information, great videos, and of course, great shows. And this show right here, if you're listening to the audio version, not sure how you found it, but if you did find it on iTunes, good for you. Rate us. Give us as many stars as you can give us. If they let you give 4, figure out a way to give us 5. Anyway, share it with your friends. Let all your friends know. We want you to download. The show is free. We want to be able to continue to do lots of great shows for you. So make sure and spread the word. Cycle Sports Radio on iTunes. It's a great way to download it and put it into your phone. But right now, we're talking about today. Now, unfortunately, for some people on the East Coast, it's still cold and rainy, and there's snow coming down in a couple places. Where I am right now in Las Vegas, Nevada, it is absolutely gorgeous. Mid-70s, sun is out. Couldn't ask for nicer weather. But, you know, I don't have to store my bike over the winter, but some people do. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what do you have to do to your bike for the parts of the country, which is a good part of it, that actually have to put their bikes away for months and months at a time. And what I did is, again, you know, I always bring out the big guns on this show. So once again, I'm bringing back from Race Tech, Matt Wiley, who's not only just a suspension guru, he also taught at MMI and just knows everything motorcycles. And is just a wealth of knowledge. So we want to bring him back. Matt, thank you so much for being on the show again today.
Thanks, Pat. It's a pleasure to be back. We've got a beautiful, sunny, 60-degree day here in the White Mountains of Arizona. Wish I was riding myself.
Yeah, I know, because you had a little bit of a cold spell there, didn't you, this winter?
Well, you know, we had an unusually cold winter for us here. You know, we're up in the mountains, so we get a little bit of snow, but usually it's gone in a few days and back in the 50s and nice again. But it was cold. It was cold. We got a little freak snowstorm just the other day. It was like 60, and then the wind blew for a day and a half, and then the snow came in behind it, and it melted right off, and it's back to being lovely again. So,
yeah, and of course that snowy, windy weather is not good riding weather. And I know there's a lot of people, and probably a little over half of the country that pretty much half the year they're not riding. The bikes get put away. Now is the time of the year that these bikes start getting pulled out. It is. Unfortunately, I wish more of the folks would address their projects on their bikes in the off season. It seems like it's always rush at the beginning of the year, but hey, that's what makes it fun. Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, nice weather. Maybe I should go get all that work done I've been wanting to do for the last 5 months. Do it right now, and I want it tomorrow. Well, yeah, and then to some of my racing friends, my Arma Vintage racing friends, and you know who you are, there was 5 months off season, and now you need it for next weekend's race? What? Don't put the projects off. Make good use of that winter time. Don't just use it for, cuddling up and having a hot chocolate. Work on those bikes. But part of the problem for those folks, though, Pat, and is what you just mentioned. It's so bitterly cold and snowy and stuff in so many parts of the country. And, not many people are blessed to have a heated workshop or heated garage. So, one reason stuff gets put off is it's just too brutally cold to go out in your garage and work on your bike. And then there's the fact that, if you've got your bike crammed into a garage with lawn and garden equipment and, mom's SUV and everything else, there may not be room to work on the thing. So there are certainly some valid reasons for not getting it done. Absolutely. But I think the big thing is before they bring those bikes out now, because the weather is very nice in certain parts of the country and getting there in others, you don't just roll the bike out, throw a leg over, and run down the road. You need trouble. So let's talk a little bit about, Matt, about what, let's start off with the guy who's just had it in there over the entire winter. Let's say that could be a 6-month period. What do they have to do to those bikes to make sure that they're going to be safe going down the road? Well, 2 things. Of course, does it run sufficiently to pull you down the road? Along with that, you got to check the safety aspects of it, because
things will be forgotten from last season. Things of tragedy can happen in a cold, dark shed, barn, or garage over the winter. And if you don't inspect the stuff that keeps you alive, you can have a really bad day. So, if you're fortunate enough that the bike starts up reasonably well and idles and throttles up and looks like it can be ridden, okay, good. That's step one. Now let's shut the engine off and go over the bike front to rear and check everything to make sure we're good to go. The most neglected article on motorcycles consistently in the 30 years I've been wrenching on bikes is the tires. Tire pressure, number one, tire condition, number two, and then, of course, are the appropriate tires fitted to the bike, so on and so forth. Closely following that for the folks that are unfortunate enough to have chain-driven motorcycles is the maintenance of the chain, keeping it properly lubed and adjusted and so forth so it doesn't have you an issue. And you got brakes and so on and so forth. So, what I suggest is, pick an end of the motorcycle. I always like to start at the front just because I'm kind of OCD, but start at one end of the motorcycle and just very carefully go around and do a little touchy-feely visual kind of a thing and see if everything is as it should be. Get some air in those tires and then look at them real close. Is there sufficient tread? Is there any signs of, cupping, dry rotting, cracking, anything of that nature that could cause you an issue? And, if you can't remember when you bought those tires, get on the sidewall, find the DOT date, and make sure the tires aren't too old. Tires have technically about a 5-year lifespan, and that is really kind of stretching it a bit. That's the legalities of it. Really, if you ride at all aggressively, if you bank into the corners, if you touch a peg down, if you have any sporting intent or heavy loading intent for you touring folks, you better check the age of those tires because they may have plenty of tread on them, but a 3, 4, 5-year-old tire does not offer the traction capability that it did when it was new. And this is one of the things that gets overlooked. I don't know how many times I've had somebody bring a bike in for something unrelated to the tires, and glancing over it, seeing the tires are old or cracked or whatever, and pointing it out. And, oftentimes the first comment is, but there's plenty of tread on it. And there's just an awful lot more to it than that.
Exactly. And the tires can be too old and not be cracking. And I think a lot of people, I shouldn't say it's not surprising, that it's surprising, but the DOT does put a born-on stamp on the tires, but they just don't tell anybody how to read their little code and where it is. They just put it on there mostly for the manufacturers, I'm assuming. But there is on pretty much all street tires, at least there should be, a little number right next to a DOT that has the week and the year of the tire. So if it says 2212, that means it was made on the 22nd week of 2012. Now, if yours says 0107, you might have an issue, even if it's a touring tire or a cruiser tire, because you're already dealing now with a tire that's 6 years old, 6.5 years old. So, and I don't think many people even know to check that because it doesn't even have to have cracking before it's going to be much harder than it was originally intended. The traction level, like you said, is going to be way down, and that traction that you're expecting to have isn't going to be there. And of course, when do you need it? When you're pushing it, when you're giving it that gas out of the corner, when you're getting on the brakes hard because of whatever situation somebody pulls out in front of you. When you need it, it's not going to be there, and that can be a critical issue.
Well, and with the motorcycles of today, Pat, they've gotten heavier, they've gotten much more powerful, both in the aspect of horsepower and in braking capability and so forth. So we've got heavier, faster motorcycles in many cases than we had before, and tires become more of an issue. I mean, you're a 75 CB750 Honda, you can only push that so hard, and a $100 set of tires is probably sufficient. But if you're on a modern 600 or 1000 sport bike, or if you're riding a Harley Bagger or a Honda Goldwing with a lot of weight, you've got some serious aspects to look at. And, your touring riders, and to a large degree, your cruiser riders, because so many of them have some sort of saddlebags, be it, leather bags or factory hard bags, whatever the case. You can't hardly see the tires,
Exactly.
The bike. And they just tend to get overlooked, especially that rear one.
Yeah.
Because you just can't see it, and it's real hard to get air in it. Many times, if the customer is willing, when I'm doing a tire installation, I'll put a 90-degree valve stem on there to make life a little bit easier. So you can get the pressure gauge on the thing and the tire pump on the thing without, gnashing up your hands and being able to see what you're doing and get too terribly greasy. So that's something to think about. If your tires are hard to access, the valve stems are hard to access, when you're getting a tire installed, request a 90-degree valve stem. Extra $10, make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, I have that on all my bikes, the street bikes at least, and even the naked bikes I have it on because it just makes it that much easier to access. On a modern sport bike, those front rotors are so big that there really isn't a lot of room to reach in there and get the gauge in, especially if you don't have an angled gauge or whatever. It's harder to get that in now. If you have the 90-degree valve stem, easy peasy, plug it in, and you're ready to go, and it's done in seconds. And I can tell you that I think most people would be amazed how much air pressure you lose. The last time you rode your bike was on a nice hot summer day, whatever situation, you missed part of fall, but now you went all the way through winter, and now spring comes again. All of a sudden, now your tires are at 20 pounds of pressure, 18 pounds of pressure. That can cause real issues, safety issues.
No, absolutely it can. And the heavier or faster the bike, the more critical that becomes. You're absolutely right. Weather changes, altitude changes will have an effect of losing some pressure. If you've got an older bike that's been around for a while, rubber builds up on the bead seating area of the rim. Sometimes corrosion too. And if the technician that's doing the tire mount for you isn't conscientious and spends a little bit of time with a wire brush or something cleaning that off, you can have a little bit of a bead sealing issue, not enough to be, dangerous per se, but, if you ride infrequently, that little bit of air that leaks out here and there over time is going to eventually catch up with you.
So, yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's one of those most overlooked parts on the bike is a lot of bikes that we've checked throughout the years when they say, oh, that's handling weird. And then all of a sudden you're like, when's the last time you checked your air pressure? And the answer to that is check my air pressure. Yep. And you look at the bike, of course, says 20 or 18 pounds of pressure, and like, handling problem figured out here. Let's get a little air in your tires. Oh, it's wearing out real fast, and it's wearing weird, and the bike is handling weird, and of course, it does a lot. And you're so lucky you didn't go down with this situation. So I think that obviously is, to me, and I know the first thing I check when a bike's been away for any period of time is I'm always checking the air pressure. I even check the air pressure when I go from one area to another. I just did some training with Lee out at Camp Pendleton, and then we did the track event out at Willow Springs. Well, I checked my air pressures when I got to California from Nevada, and guess what? There was a 4-pound difference in air pressure.
Yep. Yep. If you're doing a good job of keeping your tires at the recommended pressure, losing 3 or 4 pounds isn't going to be critical, but it is going to make a difference at the edge of the performance, and that's going to add up. If you miss that 3 or 4 pounds there, and then you lose another 3 or 4 pounds a week later down the road, now you're in the unfortunate zone. And I think a lot of folks don't realize just exactly how it is that the low air pressure accelerates the wear on your tire. Tire wear is all about heat. Heat is what kills a tire, and at the same time, heat's what makes it live. I mean, certainly it needs to be at a certain temperature for it to provide, proper and optimum traction and such. If it gets too hot, it becomes greasy and so forth, and you can lose traction that way. But your big wear issue comes when the tire is run low on air. The carcass of the tire is flexing more than it was designed to or intended to. And so your tire is made up of a series of cords and belts of nylon and steel and rayon and all kinds of different materials. And they're all laid across each other at angles and so forth. And so one of the little demonstrations I used to give for my students when I was instructing when we talk about this is, take your arms, lay them across each other, and start rubbing them back and forth, almost as if you were doing a Boy Scout kind of a thing with a couple of pieces of wood trying to make a fire. And just keep rubbing your arms back and forth against each other and see how long you can stand it before the heat and the burning sensation becomes intolerable. Well, when your tire is low on air, the cords in the tire are flexing against each other much more so than they were supposed to, and it generates heat. It stretches and wears the cords, and it wears out the your rubber tread and so forth. So that is why the low pressure accelerates tire wear. It's causing inordinate heat and flex in the tire. And, of course, your load capability and your speed capability is reduced along with the pressure. So, in other words, if your tire was rated for 150 miles an hour plus and rated to accept up to 750 pounds of weight, that is assuming the tire is at the recommended air pressure. And so if you're 30 or 40% below the recommended, you haven't lost 30 or 40% off your load and speed rating. You've probably lost more than that. So it does get to be real critical. And it's in some ways unfortunate. I think in our last conversation we talked a little bit the evolution of motorcycles. We had kind of the standard bike, and you changed it around to make it into what you wanted, be it a cruiser, a sport bike, or a touring bike, or whatever. And today everything is designed with a pretty specific purpose, and as such, they tend to have pretty specific tires. And for a lot of motorcycles, you don't have a lot of choice in tires to be able to get the correct size and so forth on your bike. It's just not like the good old days where if you had a standard kind of a motorcycle, you had your choice of some $50 economy tires that were sufficient for commuting back and forth and the occasional weekend ride, and then you had your high-end tires for the folks who were carrying heavy loads and riding aggressively and so forth. With today's specific motorcycles, be it cruiser, touring, sport, dual sport, whatever, you probably only have 2 or 3 choices of tires for any given model. And from what I found on a lot of the cruiser bikes, only one without deviating in size. And deviating in size of your tires on a modern bike often doesn't work real well. Again, your older bikes, you can go up a size, sometimes even 2, and get away with it and not have any issues. The new bikes, they just don't want to do it. Most of them are running radial tires. Rim widths and such are very very critical to the proper mounting of the tire. If we're mounting an over or undersized tire to the motorcycle, it is either pinching it together or spreading it apart too far, and that affects what is called the contour of the tire. And your contour is the shape of the treaded area. And, of course, that tire is designed for that contour to be a particular shape. And there's a little bit of lenience there, but not a whole lot. And once you deviate much from that, you are either going to wear the center out prematurely or not have proper grip at the side angles and so forth. So, you got to be, I guess my point is, it's just not really a good idea to switch tire sizes on modern bikes like it used to be back in the day.
Yeah, and you even have to be careful with the same tire size. I have an issue with that right now with the Hyosung. I'm actually going to have to painfully switch out the rear tire, which was a very expensive rear tire because at the track at Barber, the only rear tire they had available was a Power 1, which was the correct size, but was meant for a 5-inch rim and not a 4.5-inch. And basically the sides of the tread, I would have to be at MotoGP angles to even think about getting rid of the chicken strips in the back, while the front would be completely have lost traction by that point, which means that I actually have a smaller contact patch now in the rear than I would with a standard tire. And it was the right size tire. It just wasn't designed for that size wheel. So that's another area where people don't know. So you got to be real careful with tire choices. I think we've kind of gotten the idea across. The people, one of those areas people don't realize how critical. But look, that's your lifeline is your tires. Don't mess around with those.
And like I say, I've been doing this for about 30 years now, and this has been consistent. It really hasn't changed. It really hasn't gotten any better. I mean, certainly, don't get me wrong, there are riders that are extremely conscientious, but a lot of folks just don't know. And unfortunately, a lot of shops and mechanics aren't as dedicated on that as they probably ought to be. Always had a policy at every shop I've managed or owned that every bike that rolled through our doors got the tire pressures checked and the chain adjustment looked at. Always happy to squirt some air in the tires to the customer at no charge and let them know, hey, you were down 20 pounds on that. And it's supposed to be 35, 38, 40, whatever that range is for that particular model.
Yeah.
And let folks know. And the same thing goes to the chain. Chains are the most efficient, way to transfer power to the rear wheel, but they're the biggest pain in the tail.
Oh, yeah.
They require some sort of adjustment and some sort of lubrication. And the good news, chains, like tires, have gotten to be real good, and they last way longer than they used to.
If you take care of them.
Yeah, and not that we can necessarily say that about tires. It seems like the tires don't last as long and cost twice as much, but the chains as much, and they do last twice as long. But they're sensitive. One of the worst things you can do to a chain is to over-tighten it. If you over-tighten the chain, it is going to, just like your tire, cause undue heat, and it is going to affect the tensile strength and hardening process that was done to that chain. Once you run a chain too tight long enough, you're going to kill the heat treating in it, so to speak, and you'll find that it just won't hold adjustment. You'll get it adjusted right and go for one ride, and it's all sloppy loose again. you've killed that chain. Unfortunate fact, Pat, why is it that we have to leave slack in the chains? Why can't we just, run them tight like a, belt on an alternator in your car or something like that? Another reason is the suspension travel. As the rear wheel moves back and forth through its arc of travel, the tension on the chain changes. Whether it gets looser or tighter depends on the initial angle of the swing arm. And that's why the chain slack, or tension, as it might be called, varies so dramatically between manufacturers and models of bikes. You have one bike that might require a couple inches of free play in the chain, where another bike might only require half an inch due to the movement of the swing arm.
Yeah, if you have a cruiser with a very short suspension travel compared to a supermoto or an adventure touring bike, which has 8 or 10 inches or more of travel, there's going to be a difference in the slack. So we can't give out. It'd be nice to say, well, you have to put this amount of slack in your chain, but really you need to find out from the manufacturer how much slack your bike needs.
And the good news there is most motorcycles, if you look carefully on the chain guard or on the swing arm, somewhere near the chain, there is typically a decal indicating how much free play is required and where on the chain to measure it, be it at the top of the run or the bottom of the run. Typically right around in the middle point of its, of it, about halfway between the swing arm pivot and the rear wheel. But nonetheless, where do you check it and, how much? And don't overstress. It's not how far you can grab the chain with your hand and yank on it. It's how far will the chain move freely with a finger or two.
Yeah.
And everybody's adjustment procedure varies a bit. Some of them, they want you to just pull up a bit. Others, it's up and down. It varies. So, pay attention to that. Should be a decal on the bike. If nothing else, look in the owner's manual, and it will be described in there. Your owner's manual may not tell you much, but it will tell you, the proper adjustment on your chain. And then, right along with that, Pat, is lubing the chain. Your modern O-ring style chains don't require a lot of lube. When I was coming up and we had, your standard run-of-the-mill roller chain, no O-rings, just the metal link plates against each other, lube was critical. We had the good foaming chain lubes, and, you clean the thing off best you could, and then, shoot it full of lube and, watch your wheel get dirty.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Things there. The first step in lubing a chain is get the thing warm. One of the reasons so much of your lube flings off the chain is it never penetrated. So the best way to lube the chain is immediately after a ride. And I want to say a ride of at least 30 minutes or more. Enough time for the chain to get good and warm. So come off of that ride, lube up that chain while it's good and warm, and then make sure and let it set, the motorcycle set. Don't operate it anymore, rolling it back and forth across your garage or workshop for at least 20 minutes. 30 minutes is better. Reason being, that will give time for the carrier agents to evaporate. The aerosols from the lube will evaporate, and the lube that went on real wet and thin will gel up into almost a grease-like or sticky type substance. So lubing a warm chain will allow proper penetration, and then letting everything cool will allow the lube to gel up so it stays on the chain and is less likely to fling off on your wheel and make a big mess and so forth. The next mistake people tend to make on lubing chains is where they actually place the lube. And part of the issue here is the fact that, much to my ire, almost no motorcycles come these days with a center stand. Now, if you're an old school kind of a person, pretty much all bikes came with center stands. You go back to, way back in the day, and some bikes even came with center stands. They didn't come with a kickstand. But the point is, it's not easy to lube a chain properly and adjust it properly with the bike sitting on a kickstand. It doesn't work real good. So if your bike doesn't have a center stand, and most don't, it's worth investing in some sort of a swing arm stand or rear stand or some way to support the rear of that bike so that you can properly lube and adjust the chain, spin your wheel around to check that tire, make sure the rim's not bent or dangling or anything of that nature. So we want to lube that chain. We want to get the rear wheel elevated, and as we mentioned, we want to have the chain nice and warm, and you'll want to spray the lube on the inside runs of the chain. In other words, the area of the chain that's facing towards the swing arm and towards the sprockets of the motorcycle. Not the outside, strictly the inside. And we want to lay that lube very carefully in a nice bead right along the edges of the link plates, where the chain links come together. And if you've got a modern machine, almost certainly you can see some rubber O-rings in there. Now you got to realize with an O-ring chain like that, technically the lubricant is sealed inside the chain via those O-rings. So when you're lubricating a modern O-ring chain, really what you're doing is keeping the O-rings moist and wet so they don't dry out and crack, to keep that lube in there, and to give the chain a light coating to keep it from keep corrosion at bay, to keep it from rusting and so forth. So lay that lube on each of the inside runs of the chain, spin the wheel around gently and slowly using your hand on the wheel. Don't use the engine to run it. That's a good way to lose fingers or worse.
Ooh, yeah.
The motorcycle fall off the stand and take off down the street without you.
You don't want that either, yeah.
Yeah, and after you've lubed it up real good, let it sit for a couple minutes, and then take a towel and kind of cup it gently around your hands and wipe the excess lube off. Get the excess stuff off there, and then let it set. And you'll be surprised how much better your chain will last, and won't corrode and so forth. That proper lubrication is just overlooked. People tend to spray on the outside of the chain. They spray the chain when it's cold, and then they ride immediately afterwards. And those three things put together mean that the lube is largely flung away from the chain and never gets to where it needs to be.
Now, how often do you suggest on a modern O-ring chain to clean and lube the chain?
Well, that's a good question, and opinions vary largely on that. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to defer back to the chain manufacturers on that for the most part. So here's a couple of things. When I'm doing tech work for magazines and talking with customers and so forth, people tend to overlook the wealth of free knowledge that's available from a lot of these manufacturers on their websites.
Yeah.
You go to any of the major tire manufacturers or chain manufacturers, and they all have an FAQ, frequently asked questions, or care guide and so forth on their websites. And everyone's a little bit different. Some are better than others, but they've all got some great information. And so, when you're doing a little web surfing, 15 or 20 minutes of time on a couple different websites, you can really educate yourself on what's what. These manufacturers are putting this information out free, and a lot of this stuff is the same stuff, that students were paying for to be taught at MMI, and it's out there for you if you take the time and effort to find it. So, I, for just about ever, have been riding shaft drive bikes, so I don't have to worry about it.
A cheater.
Certainly when I servicing the customer's bike, we take care of that for them, but I don't know, maybe every second or third tank of gas might be a good,
Well, and certainly, I know one of the issues too is even if you ride in good weather all the time, like you said, every second or third tank of gas is probably good. But if you went out on a day and you spent 3 hours in the rain and then it was windy, it's probably a good idea to clean and lube the chain, because at that point you've gotten a lot more crap on that chain, running it through more extreme conditions, I guess you could say, than it would be your normal just kind of cruising down the street on a beautiful, bright, sunny day.
Well, you're absolutely right. Any type of harsh conditions, be it rain or wetness. If you're riding through muddy roads and trails and so forth, sand. If you're out in the desert or the high country or something like that, yeah. Here's something else to look at. If your motorcycle is dirty enough to be cleaned or washed, chances are your chain probably is too.
Yeah, and it's got something to stick to. the lubrication, which is supposed to resist a little bit of that, but dust, it's just going to stick. The dust and the dirt's just going to stick on that, and it just builds up as you ride. So now we have two very important issues. We've checked the tires, we've cleaned and lubed the chains. Another big area that you need to check, obviously, is the hydraulics, the brakes on the bike. What should they be looking for, especially the bike's been sitting now? What should they be looking for on the brakes to make sure they're going to actually stop the bike when they head down the road?
Well, certainly start with the basics. Give the levers and pedals a good pump or press and make sure it feels solid. Hold down against it for a few seconds to make sure it doesn't lose pressure. It could be caused from an internal leak when the seal's being bad in the master cylinder caliper. So is it good and solid? Does it stay good and solid after you've applied pressure and held it? If it feels mushy, squishy, or spongy, then at a minimum, the fluid has deteriorated and needs to be flushed and bled, or you have a seal failing, most typically in the master cylinder, possibly in a caliper as well. And you can, in some cases, have the master cylinder seals failing or at the beginning of the failure and not necessarily have or be able to see an external leak. But the seals are weak enough that pressure is transferring through the various chambers in the master cylinder where it's not supposed to. And so you have a loss of pressure. And, a couple of the more interesting fluids on motorcycles that get overlooked are the brake fluid and the coolant. And with any motorcycle that runs .3 or .4 brake fluid, that fluid is glycol-based, just like antifreeze is glycol-based. Now, your .5 fluid that a lot of the Harley-Davidson products use and some of the European products may use, that's different. It's a silicon-based product, and it's not that common except for the Harleys. So most of us are running on, .4 glycol-based brake fluid, and it should be changed every season, every other season, semi-annual at a minimum. The fluid is hygroscopic, which means that it naturally absorbs air from the atmosphere, and the air contaminates the fluid, and when it gets hot, it can become steam and actually boil away and leave you with spongy brakes. Of course, the fluid gets dirty, too, just by its nature. I've got one of my motorcycles has like 250,000 miles on it, and it's never had the brake system rebuilt, ever, because I change the fluid to thing every year, sometimes even twice. I ride quite a bit, and, halfway through the riding season, if I notice the fluid is darkened, I go ahead and change it. Certainly I'm at an advantage that I have the ability to do this stuff myself, but it's not that hard to learn, and how much is a bottle of brake fluid? $5.
Yeah.
Life worth.
Yeah.
$5. Okay, so solid lever. Does the fluid through the sight windows and so forth look clean and clear? If you can't remember the last time it was flushed and changed, then it's time. I can pretty much assure you. From there, just kind of do some visual inspections. Most motorcycles have a rubber-coated brake line. Take a look at that rubber coating, see if it's got any checks or cracks or anything of that nature. Anything that you can see or feel on those brake lines mandates immediate replacement. Because the way those brake lines work, there is a Teflon tube inside there that carries the fluid. And the rubber is largely a protective coating to allow the line to flex around without chance of cracking that tube, and to protect it from the elements and foreign objects and so forth.
And you really, really need to be careful. You need to watch these. I was actually talking to Brittany Morrow the other day, and Brittany is a good friend of ours, and she was just on the show last week, and she was talking about one of the classes that she taught, and one of the exercises they do is maximum braking, okay? This guy had been riding all day, and they were doing the maximum braking exercise, and right at the maximum part of the maximum braking, the front brake line burst. Yikes. Now, fortunately...
That's bad a couple of different ways, because not only did we lose hydraulic pressure for the brakes, but now chances are there's brake fluid coating our tire, making it very slippery.
Oh, yeah. So I think the big issue there is there could have been maintenance issues. It could have been damage at some point, but obviously it wasn't checked, or, they certainly didn't keep up on it. And thank goodness it happened on a range where there was runoff and he could use his back brakes and slow the bike down. And they managed to get another brake line for him and get the bike back going again. But what if that would have happened on the highway? Think about that. So you really, there's certain parts, again, we talked about the tires, but without any brake pressure, the tires aren't going to help you stop if there's no brakes. So you really...
Another overlooked piece, Pat, rubber brake lines, like tires, have a DOT date stamped in them, and they're technically supposed to be replaced every 5 years. Now, that may be a bit of an overkill for a lot of folks. On the other hand, if you've got a vintage or a classic bike from the 70s or 80s and it's got the original rubber lines on there, for Lord's sakes, get them off.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I actually saw somebody that was selling an RD350 that one of the bragging points was all original tires and hoses and all that. And I'm like, And
if you're going to display it, that's fine. If you're going to ride it, not really.
Not good.
If you're replacing brake lines, just go with stainless steel. You can get the steel braided brake lines. They look slicker, and you don't have to worry about replacing those because you don't have the rubber to go bad, and they will improve your brake feel. Beyond poor brake fluid condition or air in the system, the second leading cause of spongy brakes is the brake hose expanding. That rubber has gotten old, and it's expanding on the brake line pressure. So that's why when you switch from rubber brake lines to steel braided brake lines, your lever is so much firmer. You're not losing energy to line expansion. It's all being transmitted from the lever right to the pistons and the caliper and giving you more brake pressure. So a lot of ways you can do that. I mean, there's all kinds of kits on the market, pre-made kits that are real nice. They're not terribly expensive, $100 to $175, depending on the application. So it's not a ton of money. You can have folks custom built a stainless steel brake lines. This is one of the things I do for folks with classic bikes, vintage bikes, that stainless lines aren't available anymore. They send me their stock brake lines, and I match them. Or maybe you've made a change to the bike. You've got lower bars or something like that, and you need shorter lines made. So, a lot of different ways to go after that. They're all over the place, but definitely don't waste your time with the rubber hoses. Go right to braided steel.
Yeah, get rid of those. And I think it's an area where, again, people just don't even think about it. They don't think about their brake lines, about the brake fluid. You have to change all of your fluids on your bike on a regular basis. Also, the coolant. I think people will have coolant in their bike for 10 years. And most of the brake master cylinder and caliper seal failures that I've encountered, and virtually all of the water pump failures, were a result of the fluid being too old. It was old, it was dirty, it was contaminated, and it actually becomes corrosive after a point. And here comes a bike in, the water pump's leaking, and clearly the coolant that came out of it was what the manufacturer put in it 5, 10, 15 years ago. You got to change that stuff. You got to change it regularly. And part of the problem is, unfortunately, in most cases, nobody's telling you to do this. There are certain brands of motorcycles that they're very tuned on the maintenance. And part of that is to keep the motorcycle operating at its potential. Part of that is for rider safety. And let's face it, a certain part of that is to keep you coming back to the dealership. Oh, yeah.
Davidson, BMW, Ducati have very strict maintenance schedules. If you don't follow those maintenance schedules and have a warranty problem, you're more likely to get a hard time about it. Not that they won't cover it per se, but they're certainly going to give you a hard time about it if you haven't followed that maintenance. Whereas with the Asian brands, the Japanese brands, there's a table. It's in your owner's manual. It's in the service manual, and it's an age versus mileage, whichever comes first. Every so many miles or months, you're supposed to check, adjust, replace, replenish, whatever the case. And that was always one of the comments I used to get from folks, when working in shops, when they come in and, I want my motorcycle serviced, okay? And first question I ask them then is, how much service are we looking for? What all do we need done? Do you know? And then help chat with the customer, discuss, how long it's been since they serviced, what they've had serviced and what they haven't, and go from there. But our complete or full services, as we used to, refer to them, covered every single aspect on that chart. I mean, we looked at every piece of the bike. Sometimes people are a bit shocked at the price. It's like, the so-and-so said it was going to be $100, and you're telling me it's going to be between 3 and 4. Why so much? And it actually had a really nice poster that came with one of the aftermarket service manuals, and it had a picture of a gold bike, and it had the maintenance chart below it, and it had the little, windows and arrows and such with the text going to all the major pieces, and we had that right at the service counter. It's like, okay, your full service from us includes all of these inspections and adjustments. We are going to check, inspect, and adjust every single aspect of this. If it's fine, we're going to leave it. If it needs adjusted, we're going to adjust it. If it needs replaced, we're going to replace it. And that's what you're paying for. Now, call back to this other shop that said it was going to be half as much and ask them what you're getting. And chances are you're going to get fresh oil, spark plugs, and some air in your tires and some lube on your chain. And that's all they're giving you versus we're checking the steering head bearing adjustment. We're checking the fork oil condition. We're checking the valve clearances, the carburetor, fuel injection throttle bodies, all the fluids and filters, all the chassis bearings. It's fairly intensive. Quite a bit there.
Because I think really if you want your motorcycle to last, and it's the same with the car as well, is you really do have to keep up on the maintenance. And when the bike's been sitting for months and months, that's a great opportunity to, because when you're riding, sometimes you just want to ride and go. Well, at this point now, maybe you're planning ahead, hopefully, for the riding season. Get all that maintenance done. Get it all done at once. Save up for it if you have to. Save up over the winter because you're going to spend a few bucks. If you know how to do it yourself, it's going to save you a lot. But if you don't, you're going to have a decent repair bill, but it's going to save you in the long run because if God forbid you break down in the middle of nowhere, we don't even want to talk about how much that's going to cost you.
Yeah. No bill will just about pay for your service. And it's like so many things in life. It's a catch-22 or a blessing and a curse, as I like to say. Your modern motorcycles, very much like your modern cars, have become so, I hate to use the word maintenance-free, but they just don't call out or scream for maintenance like the stuff of old did.
Sure.
And it lulls you because it's just not begging for you to to keep up with it. It's there. It just doesn't ask for much, and things get overlooked. On your modern bikes, they become so reliable that, your major maintenance is filter and fluid replacement and servicing the chassis bearings and components and such. So, got to kind of, bear that in mind and realize that, hey, you got to stay up with this. And something for you folks that live in the snow belt to consider. There are a lot of shops in the dead of winter, from post Thanksgiving until maybe the end of February, will offer free pickup and delivery. If you're having a complete service done or having major work done and so forth. So that's something to think about, because that's one thing that stops us from having our motorcycle service in the off season is, if you don't have a truck or a trailer suitable to transport the thing, and it's bitterly cold or icy or snowy, it just isn't conducive to getting your motorcycle into the shop to have it serviced. So, next winter, check that aspect. I bet you find if you live in the snow belt, there's probably a shop in your area that will offer some sort of special on picking up and delivering your bike for you and getting that maintenance done, because, those guys aren't as busy a lot of times in the off season because people aren't riding. So something to take advantage of.
Absolutely. Now, so basically, a synopsis of it is when you pull the bike out, it's a great idea to just go stem to stern, replace all your fluids, check anything that moves, and basically check out the whole bike to make sure that there's nothing wrong. There's no cracks in hoses, cracks in tires. You really want to do a complete look over it, because as the bike sits, things can happen. So you really do need to be thorough before you take it out that first time.
You do, and now that we've verified the condition of the motorcycle and that it's running properly, it's safe to operate, your brakes are working right, your suspension's working right, only fork seal's leaking, your shocks have damping, and your chain's lubed and adjusted, your tires are aired up, your brakes are solid, the fluid's fresh. Now we need to look at the third aspect, the rider.
Yeah.
Any period of time more than a few short weeks without riding, I feel rusty. When I get on the bike, wheels just aren't as sharp, because it's a muscle like everything else, and you don't use it, it gets out of shape.
I absolutely agree. I hadn't been on the track since August. I got back on the track again for the first time here last 2 weeks ago, and boy, those first couple of sessions, I was feeling rusty. But as a rider, some of the issues you're not going to be as maybe aware. You're going to be thinking a little bit more about the actual physical operation of the bike and maybe not paying as much attention. And I got to tell you, perfect example. We have beautiful weather here today. Okay, it's sunny. The wind stopped finally after a week. Both times that I came to the office today, to the studio today, I had to divert around a motorcycle accident. The first one was the motorcyclist's fault. He basically ran into the back of another vehicle, 100% avoidable. The second one was a car pulling out in front of the motorcycle that he hit. Now, that may have not been his fault, but that doesn't mean it couldn't have been avoided, because sometimes we're just not paying enough attention or being paranoid enough and going, this guy just might pull out, and trying to find an escape route, because the fact is, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It doesn't hurt any less.
No, and, finely honed riding skills, perfected from a combination of practice and rider education, can make the difference of that being just, a skinned knee and a scratched up bike, because you were able to keep it from becoming a tragedy due to your skill and your motorcycle was properly maintained, versus, blasting in the side of that SUV that turned left in front of you at a high speed because your skills were poor, your bike wasn't in proper condition, and it results in a trip to the hospital and a little time of traction, which is no fun. I can tell you from experience. Absolutely,
because you've lived through that and dealt with the circumstances of that, which it's never fun. Like I said, you want to ride and enjoy it. You don't want to spend time healing up because of whatever the situation might have been. And again, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It still hurts. So we still have to be out there and work on our skills and be uber aware. And I mean, today was a perfect example. I'm seeing so many people out on their bikes, no gear, of course, a helmet because it's required by law in Nevada, but pretty much not a lot more. and that's going to also increase the damage that's going to happen to you, in the situation where there's an accident. But for me to be twice today drive by serious motorcycle accidents, it's unfortunately that time of year. So your mental aspect, your mental preparation has to be just as thorough as the preparation on your bike when you pull it out of the garage for the first time.
Well, and just as we mentioned, our skills are rusty because we've been off the bike for a series of months due to weather and time constraints and so forth. Same thing for the car drivers. They haven't seen us, in a few months. They're not used to seeing us on the road yet. And, the modern vehicle with the level of distractions offered upon you by touchscreen this and GPS that and MP3 player and cell phones and everything else, very distracted environment, which I think, Pat, that would take us to the next aspect. Would come right behind a rider tuning his or herself up. And you mentioned it, that'd be the gear you're wearing.
Oh, yeah.
You have gear. I cringe when I see people in shorts. I cringe even harder when I see people in shorts and sandals on a motorcycle.
I don't know how they do that.
I used to get a lot of grief from my coworkers because I always wore long sleeves and long pants working in the shop. And most motorcycle dealerships service departments are not air conditioned. So if you work in somewhere where it gets warm, you can get kind of rough. And then, guys are wearing shorts and t-shirts in the shop. But what are you wearing long pants and boots and long sleeves for? And I was like, well, when they come back with that burnt ankle from that hot muffler, well, that was why. When you drop that cylinder head on your toe, and you don't have on, that's why. And then let's take that to the next level. If we're, Lord forbid, traveling down the road or the trail and something goes askew, and all of a sudden we're no longer mounted on the motorcycle, but we're bouncing along the terrain, the apparel you're wearing is going to make a big difference in your comfort and safety in the end result. And, the little things get overlooked. On the way to one of the events last year, was riding with a good friend of mine that helps me at a lot of events. And, his riding gear was older. He had great, pants and jacket, but his helmet was older. And so a couple things going on there. Number one, it just didn't fit him quite right anymore. It was giving him all kinds of issues there. Number two, the shield was scratched and pitted enough, he just couldn't keep it clean. And it was just driving him crazy because first couple of days of the trip, it didn't rain per se, but, it was foggy and misty and sprinkly and so forth. And the thing was just constantly fogging up. He couldn't see what he was doing. Every stop we're, polishing and cleaning on this visor, all of a sudden, $20 later for a fresh visor, whole different world. So it's the little things make big difference. Helmets have a lifespan. The shells will deteriorate to some degree, and that's not as big a deal as it used to be with the modern materials they're using and the coatings they're putting on it. But it's the inside that wears out. It's the styrofoam padding and the liners and such in there. It wears and it doesn't fit you right anymore. And then of course there's the hygiene factor. If you don't have the washable helmet liner and so forth. All my helmets now have washable liners, and I just not quite sure, how I was able to stand it before.
Yeah, I know.
Years, and you couldn't really do much more to clean it other than squirt some simple green in it, and put the water to it, and then set it out in the sun and let it dry. I mean, that certainly helps, but not the same as a removable washable liner. I just don't know how I lived through that in the past.
Yeah, you definitely check, because even on the ride that we did last year, when we had that hours of downpour, of course, on the twistiest part of the ride, my visor, which was only a couple of years old, I could not see through. I mean, we literally did 120, 130 miles of me looking in between water on the shield to try and find a spot where I could see the road. Needless to say, that had to be in I'm not going to say how many years, 20 plus years of riding. That was the most scary situation I had ever been through. I'm a better rider for it because I made it through, but I'll tell you what, it made me appreciate, and the next thing I did is get a new visor, because that visor would simply it would fog. It wouldn't, the wind, even when we sprayed it, we had that anti-fog that we put on it. That didn't even work. And that's only with a visor that's a couple years old.
Yeah, I get some chiding from, some of my friends and people I ride with and know in the industry and so forth about how often I change helmet visors and how often I change oil and so forth. And it's like, yeah, you can laugh at me all you want. If you rode cross-country, by yourself in all kinds of conditions, $20, $30 for a fresh helmet visor, is inconsequential, and get a lot of grief, especially from the magazine folks, magazine readers, writing in the tech columns I've worked with over the years. I'm going to say it. I'm going to open a can of worms, but you know what? I use motorcycle oil. There's a reason for it. We could talk about that, but I use motorcycle oil. Is it $7 to $10 a quart? Yep. Do I change it frequently? Yep. Do I get 200,000 miles on my motors? Yep. It's like everything else. You can pay a little now or a lot more later, but change the oil.
And it's important to note you get 200,000 miles out of a vintage motor, not a modern motor.
Yeah, 80s era motors. Yeah.
So where back then, let's face it, when you had 25, 30,000 miles on a bike, you thought, well, it's pretty much done.
No, I remember reading in the early 1980s that the average life of a motorcycle was something like 15 or 17,000 miles, and then it was discarded or replaced. They didn't really get specific as to what, but that boggled my mind. 17,000 miles? I mean, I've ridden that much one year on some occasions before, and people are throwing away their bikes after that. It's crazy. It's one of the reasons you can find a lot of times older bikes with low mileage. It's a different world then.
So we definitely want to check our bike. We want to check our gear. We want to make sure we're prepared because obviously the enjoyment that comes from riding comes from not having to worry about all of this other stuff. And if you've ever been broken down on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, you know that it's not fun. If you've ever had a mechanical somewhere, and certainly just the safety issues of, if you have a tire failure, the tire's going to fail generally at the extreme. If you're lucky, it fails when it's sitting in the parking lot when you went to go get lunch, but most likely it's going to fail when it's at being pushed to the highest degree. You're doing a high-speed run, you're pushing it in a corner, and the tire just goes, yeah, I'm done. And you just don't want to go through that. So you really have to be diligent. It doesn't matter what kind of bike you're riding either. You have a tire failure on a big cruiser, that's going to hurt even more.
Yep.
That's a lot more.
Bike back and forth underneath you, it's like riding a bucking bronco. The chances of wrestling it down are not real strong.
So now here's the thing, too, is we talked about what we have to do when we pull it out. We know we have to be mentally prepared, everything else. But sometimes, too, I think most people, when they park their bike for the winter, they literally just park their bike for the winter. Or they park it for a few years. You can save yourself some time on the opposite end if you do a little preparation work when you're putting a bike away. So why don't you talk a little bit about what we should do if we know that where the bike's going to be in a garage, parked with for an extended period of time?
Certainly, and a couple things to think about there, Pat. A lot of folks, their motorcycle is recreation and enjoyment, something they don't get to operate regularly due to their personal circumstances. So even folks that, aren't necessarily storing a bike, for 4 to 6 months over a harsh winter period, just due to their life circumstances, they may only get that thing out, once a month. So the bike sits there and it's technically not in storage. It's just not really being used.
Yeah.
The first thing to start with is to get yourself a what we refer to as a smart charger. In other words, a computer-controlled battery charger that you have a little pigtail that mounts permanently to your battery and sticks out in some sort of semi-accessible place so that when you push that unit into your garage or your storage shed, you plug it right into the smart charger. And these things are nifty because they got a little computer chip in them that senses the capacity on the battery. And it makes sure the battery gets to a full charge without overcharging it, and then puts what they call a float charge on it, where it just gives it a little bit of a maintenance trickle, and then from time to time it zaps it with a little bit of extra juice to make sure that we don't get sulfation, which is a crystalline growth that occurs inside the battery. That's a crystal that grows from one battery plate to the next battery plate and eventually shorts it out. So, the chargers of old, back in the day, if you left them on the bike and walked away from it and forgot about it, it would cook and kill your battery.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they had the little classic half amp per 1 amp trickle chargers that were safe to leave on the battery for long periods of time. But if it was not a maintenance-free type battery, in other words, one that you had to add distilled water to from time to time, eventually they'll cook the water out of it, and then the plates warp the battery, and you still got a dead battery. So we're fortunate today between the fact that most modern bikes made in the last 10 years or so are using a maintenance-free style battery that you don't have to worry about adding fluid to it. And the fact that we have these smart chargers available, and there's all kinds of different ones. Battery tenders are real well known. The Lawson brand chargers are good. The Optimate, Techmate products are all very good. for somewhere between $35 and $100, you can buy a charger that'll maintain one bike or maybe even two or three. So that would be step one. Have a smart charger, a maintenance-free charger, a walk-away-from-it type of device that you can plug your bike in to keep your battery fresh. The next aspect that's going to get folks, particularly in long-term storage, but potentially even in short-term storage of a month or 6 weeks, is gas failure. This garbage that they're selling us for $4 and $5 a gallon that they claim to be gasoline doesn't do very well if it sits for any period of time. If you've got an older bike that has carburetors, the issues are just endless. Leaking fuel, clogged up low-speed jets where the bike doesn't want to idle or doesn't throttle up properly, just terrible. The fuel-injected motorcycles seem to fare a bit better running-wise, probably because of the high pressure that the system operates on and blow the junk out of there. But nonetheless, they're certainly prone to drivability problems. So if we're going to store the motorcycle, and you know that you're not going to be able to ride it in the immediate future, don't know when the next time you're going to get to ride it is, if at all possible, top it off with fresh fuel and put some fuel stabilizing agent in it. There's all kinds of stuff on the market, motorcycle shops, small engine shops, auto parts stores, even Walmart, will have the stuff. So read the bottle, how much of it are you supposed to add for your fuel system capacity. It's best to add it, while you're filling up or topping off with gas so that it helps, mix and circulate the stuff in the fuel in the tank. And then here's a big overlooked point. Like we talked about riding the bike for 20 or 30 minutes to lube that chain, you better ride the bike for 15 to 30 minutes after you put the stabilizing agent in it. Otherwise, it's not going to get to the carburetor, the fuel injectors. So, rolling your bike in the garage and pouring some fuel stabilizer in the gas tank and walking away from it's probably not going to help you that much. It may help the fuel in the tank to last longer, but the rest of the system is still going to go sour. The fuel's going to varnish, it's going to gum up. The good stuff evaporates, and it leaves this oily, varnishy, stinky, brownish, greenish kind of stuff behind that clogs passageways and kills rubber O-rings and so forth. So stabilize the fuel. Make sure you've ridden the motorcycle for at least 15 or 20 minutes, after adding the stabilizer to it. And if you've got drivability problems, if your bike's been sitting for a little while and it was running fine when you parked it, but now it doesn't idle strongly, it stalls out, it's got a hiccup or a miss as you're coming up through the RPMs, accelerating and so forth, almost certainly have a fuel system issue. There are a host of fuel system cleaners on the market. I've never tried them all. I've had good luck with several. The old Chevron Techron, which is readily available a lot of places, seems to work well. It may take 2 or 3 tanks full of fuel for it to have its effect, but a lot of times, if you're patient and keep using it, it will get that system cleaned out and get that bike running properly again. Redline has a real nice fuel injector and carburetor cleaner I've had good luck with. BMW sells a fuel injector cleaner, and it's proprietary. It's BMW dealerships, and like a lot of BMW parts, it's not cheap, but it works exceptionally well. Fuel injected bikes that wouldn't idle. That you're looking at, God, are we going to have to, pull these injectors and put them in an ultrasonic cleaner or replace them, or what's it going to take? And 2 or 3 tanks of fuel with this treatment added will clean them up in a lot of cases. So bear that in mind. Do pay attention, like we did with the fuel stabilizer. Read that label and see, how much you're supposed to put in. Because let's face it, the majority of your fuel system cleaners and additives are designed with automotive use in mind. So they're figuring on, somewhere between 12 and 25-gallon gas tanks, where your motorcycle probably holds more like 3 to 6 gallons. So don't necessarily just dump the whole bottle in there. That could cause other issues, O-ring swelling and failure, maybe even lean running on the bike. And to meet the emissions regulations of today, pretty much all motorcycles run very, very lean. I mean, these things run lean to the point right at the edge of disaster to meet the emissions regulations. That's one of the big reasons everything's fuel injected today. They can't meet the emissions regulations of carburetors anymore. Otherwise, they would have put fuel injectors on them. I guarantee it. Costs more money. And I don't really remember in the late 80s and early 90s when fuel injection started to come into play, and the late 90s when it got common. I don't remember anybody screaming, "I want fuel injection on my bike." Nobody really cared. As long as the bike ran good, they didn't care if they had carbs or fuel injectors. They just wanted to run it. And they did that by necessity, to achieve the performance that we want and demand and meet the emissions regulations. So I guess my point is, if you're riding around on a bike that already is just barely getting enough fuel to run properly, due to emissions regulations, and now your injectors are clogged up and dirty and not delivering proper fuel, your engine's running even hotter. So you could potentially be taking life away from that engine as well as performance.
Yeah, it's when you store any vehicle, I think you just don't think about all the things that can happen to it. And we've talked about all these different aspects: fuel system, brake lines, all these things that we just take for granted, and any one of those can cause huge issues, and you have to pay attention to all of them. And there are ways, and it sounds like a lot. It really does sound like a lot, but the reality is if you keep up with it, it's not a lot. It's when you neglect it for a long period of time that you're going to get hit with that big giant bill, because that's when the brake failures happen. That's when the fuel system issues happen, that you have to start rebuilding things. That's when you have tire failures, when you have chain failures, when you have all these other issues, is because you've neglected it. So if you just spend a little bit of time on all these areas, and like you said, there's so much information on the internet via the manufacturers, via all those frequently asked questions. The information is all out there. So I think sometimes we get a little lazy, myself included, but certainly the information is out there and available, and you just got to stick with it, because let's face it, what we want to do when we're out on a bike is enjoy the ride, not worry about something failing or breaking down in the middle of nowhere, or certainly having an incident that causes a crash, which can be considerably worse, because you can have some serious injuries or worse than that. And that affects everybody. So we need to stay up on all of this stuff. And you've given us some great advice. And I got to tell you, it even sparks me. I'm like, yeah, I got to make sure I got to check my brake fluid, because on that bike I have, it's even getting me in gear for this stuff. It's always nice to have the wealth of knowledge that is Matt Wiley at our disposal.
I appreciate that, and you're right. And we both mentioned it. The internet is a great source of information. It's not one of those things. It's like your cell phone. It's like, how did I, get through life without this? 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. But do be careful with the internet, folks.
Yes.
There is an equal amount of misinformation, or even worse yet, wrong or bad or dangerous information on the internet. For this type of thing, I would suggest you gravitate toward manufacturer websites. Don't just necessarily watch some YouTube video of some yoo-hoo that thinks he knows. Go to the Dunlop or the Avon or the Pirelli website or whatever. Go to the Yuasa Batteries or the MK Batteries website. Read their information there. Go to EBC and Dunlop Pad and SBS. Read their information on brakes. If you're looking at YouTube videos or reading independent articles, you want to know who wrote that. What's their background? I mean, is this somebody that's in the industry, that's professional with training and experience and legitimate knowledge? Or is this somebody with good intent? And I'm not trying to say people are out there necessarily trying to mess you up, but there's a lot of folks that think they know, and unfortunately they don't. I'm not saying that people that aren't in the industry don't work on motorcycles or provide great information. They do. But I've always loved it over the years when I've got some ugly situation that I'm trying to unravel for somebody that considers himself to be a motorcycle mechanic, and you ask them what they do for a living, and they're this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, okay, I don't think I could go do your job proficiently and just go do it. So what makes you think you can come do mine without learning? So I guess my point is, don't believe everything you hear. If you're watching something, make sure to verify the source. Make sure it's somebody that knows what they're talking about, and it's not somebody that just looking for 15 minutes of fame.
Exactly. You need to consider who's giving you the information. Like I said, forums can be a great source of information and a horrible source of information, because it seems like 80% or more of that is completely wrong, because it's people just some of the information that's out there about everything motorcycles was information that somebody came up with 50 years ago and just kept spreading it, and they were wrong 50 years ago, and they're even more wrong now. So really consider who it is that's passing on that information. That's why I always get the big guns. See, I'm not stupid enough. I'm not so smart that I don't realize I'm not that smart. You know what I mean? I don't know how if I put that right, but I know that I need to go seek people who know more than I do about this to hand out information. I consider myself a very educated person when it comes to this. I'm educated enough to know that when it comes to stuff like this, I need to get guys like you to talk about it because you live this. This is what you do for a living. This is your area of expertise. So anybody out there who's listening to the show, when you get information from anybody about anything, especially something where your life is at stake, and it is when you're on a motorcycle, make sure that they're qualified to give you those answers. And that's certainly why we're sitting here today talking with Matt Wiley, because I don't know a whole lot more qualified people than you, sir, to answer all of these questions. That's why we're here today. And I thank you so much for everything that you've done today. It's been amazing information. As usual, I mean, we could sit here and talk for weeks about this stuff because we kind of get into our gearhead talk and it could go on forever. But man, it's been a great show, Matt. I really appreciate everything that you've done and all the great information. And we're looking forward to the next show that we're doing with you, which is going to be on touring bikes. And you've done a little bit of touring yourself. So that'll be coming up in a few weeks. We'll sit down and we'll talk touring bikes. And if anybody doesn't know about Matt, Matt does a lot of touring. Matt will say, I got to go do a show in New York, and he throws a leg over and he rides to New York. So this is a guy that also knows his stuff. There's a wealth of information. Again, Matt, thank you so much. And how can people find out more information about you? I know we talked about it on the other show, but how can they get a hold of Matt Wiley?
Well, a couple ways to find me. You can go to racetech.com, and on the vintage and touring pages, there's an email link to me. You can go to my website. It's moto-services.net. There's contact information and email capability for me there. I'll welcome your questions. Do my utmost to take time and answer folks' questions. It gets to be kind of an issue for me sometimes, but it's one of the things I've always prided myself in is to take time for people and answer their questions and give them the best information I can. So always happy to talk to you.
And we all appreciate that because I know how busy you are, and you're one of those people like myself that always seems to be on the go. And of course, for all of you that like to contact us, certainly you could find us at cyclesportstv.com. You could find us on YouTube at youtube.com/cyclesportstv. Find us on YouTube and Twitter at cyclesportstv, Pinterest, Instagram, all these different multimedia outlets. You can get a hold of us. And I am not the expert. I just know the expert. So if you have any questions for me, I'm certainly going to answer them the best that I can. But anything that I'm not sure about, I go to guys like Matt because they know their stuff. And like I said, I'm smart enough to know who the experts are, and it's not me. And we want to thank everybody for listening to us today. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope you tune in and rate us on iTunes. Give us a rating so people can find us. Go on there. Maximum stars. Show us some love. Spread the word. And thanks again for listening to Cycle Sports Radio.